My name is Hayley Peters, and I'm the Chief Nurse at Somerset Foundation Trust, which is an unusual place to work in that we are the only integrated organisation in the whole of England that includes two acute hospitals, a county-wide provider for community, county-wide provider for mental health. I've got dental and I've got primary care practices and learning disability. So I've got, it's like the top trumps. I've got this full set, which means that I've got about upwards of 14,000 colleagues, and within that, a large number of internationally educated nurses and other professions. My experience as a senior nurse with international recruitment probably goes back about 15 years, and I would say during that time we've learned an awful lot, most of it the hard way, in terms of how to introduce people to a different healthcare system, how to support them and integrate them into our communities, and to create conditions where they can thrive alongside others that 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 can thrive too. Um, Somerset is unusual in that it has a strong dependency on international recruitment. So, in terms of my time and attention, I've learned, you know, in many ways the hard way, that I have to be hands on in order to really understand what's happening in my organisation. And by hands on, I don't necessarily mean the kind of direct operational kind of delivery of those individuals. But my role ultimately is to really listen to those internationally educated colleagues, to really understand their experience, and then to go and inquire, explore, ask questions, and just make sure that we've got the right resources in order to fulfill the pillars of We Thrive, um, and to make sure that we've got the right organisational culture supported by our values in which to land those individuals successfully, compassionately. Um, yeah, so I actually spend quite a lot of my time, I guess, listening mostly, and then asking questions and poking around generally. So I think it's location specific, isn't it? Often, and it's about understanding your community and understanding your services. So, for example, my offer to a nurse who lands in rural Somerset is very different to my offer who lands in an acute hospital. And so, understanding, and I guess it's very similar to nursing from a person-centered perspective. So understanding that candidate, what motivates them, what allows them to feel part of a community, what they need from us, what they need from others, helps us understand where they will thrive best and hopefully settle best. So we very much promote that ethos and that approach. It's quite hard in a rural county to get that right. Um, Somerset isn't a county that international colleagues know well either. So a lot of our agenda is about introducing them to our communities. So we try and tailor our offer to the individual in a really, hopefully, a person-centered way, but also try and tailor that offer to the community and what we know about that community. Part and parcel of our approach with internationally educated nurses is to make sure that they really understand the National Health Service and the way and that runs and its ethos, and particularly from the perspective of the different roles that people play, but particularly family. So an area that we really focus on is um, what we know to be true from, for example, our nurses that come from India or the Philippines and other countries, is that they're not used to doing personal care for the older generation, and they are very used to families coming in, and that's very different in the UK. So we spend a lot of time during the induction phase, and we have lengthened that period of supervision considerably to 6 weeks, so that, and more if people need it, so that they can really understand that. Because if they don't understand that, then communication with family and just the care of that individual can be quite, can be quite difficult. There are also things like, in the pandemic, we introduced, so during those 18 months when we were relatively locked down, I think I had 200 nurses that I introduced as international colleagues who've never experienced visiting. So when visiting opened up again, we had to work really hard, not just with them, actually, with some of our UK domestic nurses, if you like. We wanted them to understand why visiting was important. And that's still a problem. We are still kind of having to address that. So being live to what's different, not just from a technical perspective in terms of a curriculum, but from a societal perspective. And that's the bit that we find we have to spend most time on. And that delivers, real benefit if we do that. In terms of the preparedness of our teams, I talked about going back sort of 10, 15 years, and I think we've made really good progress. For example, now 25% of all of my nurses are from an internationally educated background, which is very high for Somerset relative to our population. And I would say that integration generally is better. But when we see issues, and a lot of this is around cultural competence of individuals and the cultural competence of a team, then we need to compassionately support teams and leaders in order to improve their cultural competence, so that they can understand those individual needs and why they're different. And we do have to be clear about the direction that we've set ourselves and our commitment to properly, holistically integrate our internationally educated nurses. For example, our internationally educated nurses, they want to go home at least once every 2 years and hopefully once a year. And, obviously pay can be a barrier, so that's quite expensive to go home. But it can be to see their children, it's certainly to see their parents and their siblings. And it's a huge part of how they are and to ensure that they remain happy in the UK. We really do need to support that. But not all managers wanted to support them and be flexible around 3 weeks leave, for example. And barriers are put in place sometimes because we've always done it this way. We've never given more than 3 weeks leave unless you're getting married or something like that. And that's just not good enough. So role modeling strongly, hoping to take people with you in the first instance. And then when the barriers are really there, saying, no, this isn't good enough. And if we want to retain these individuals and we want them to be happy in the UK working, then we need to work really hard to make sure we can accommodate this. And, a lot of this is anchored in cultural competence and not understanding the kind of race agenda. But, it's been shared with me, often not directly because people are scared, that when nurses are in the coffee room and they're on their break, they've been stopped from talking in their mother tongue to another colleague, which is abhorrent to me. I cannot, for so many reasons, not least of all when you talk to our international nurses about how utterly exhausting it is to talk in English for a 12-hour shift, that it's a way of recharging themselves often, and it's part of their identity, it's part of who they are, it's part of what we should celebrate about them. And when they're in the coffee room, they absolutely should and could, can talk in their mother tongue, if you like. So when I hear about that, I get very hands-on. and I go and have really direct conversations, often with, this has been shared with me. What are your thoughts on that? What do you think my reflections are on hearing that? And then we try and take it through a coaching way. And sometimes, we just have to go, this is actually racism. And that's a really good example of when to get involved as a chief nurse. Whether our international nurses are reaching their potential, and why do they stay at a band 5, some of them. And I don't think ever a week goes by when we're not talking about this and doing something about it. And we are starting to see our res data move, because we've been looking at the data in detail. Barriers weren't because they were shy or they didn't want career progression. They really did want career progression, but they couldn't see themselves in the senior roles. They didn't believe that it was in their reach. And when you talk with them about their experience of even sounding out, they've generally had experience of a knockback, or someone saying that to them, you're not quite ready, or you need one more qualification. And then you start understanding that agenda a little bit more, and you realize that our international nurses often have many more qualifications than a UK nurse, because they've been told to collect them if they want career progression, and yet when they express an interest, they're told they're still not ready. So you get in this spiral of going nowhere. And so we decided to do something about that about 5 years ago, and started to think about what positive action looked like for all colleagues to reach their potential. And for our international nurses, a lot of that was around sponsorship from senior white nurses often, and mentorship from our multicultural network, which is a staff network that we have. And we started to see career progression then with our 5s to 6s and our 6 to 7s. And 5 years ago, it was really small numbers. But once we had internationally educated nurses in navy blue, like looking like a ward sister, a senior nurse, or a team leader, then other people recognized it was in their reach, and then they started applying more. Then we started to wonder why they weren't quite reaching the more senior roles. And then we started to do more listening. And what we understood was that the interview process is really, really sets many of them up to fail. Because when you hear questions in English, so not your first language, and interview questions are often not straightforward at all. So if you're hearing a question that's not quite straightforward, that might have a double negative in it because we've asked it poorly, and you're trying to translate that, you're on the back foot as an internationally educated nurse, and that's not great. And we also know that interviews don't get the best out of people. So we've tested some work where we give all candidates the 8 questions in advance, a week before the interview, and we are seeing much stronger presentations from everybody, actually, not just those internationally educated nurses. It's very popular. And we're also making sure that those nurses are sponsored, so that they get coaching to prepare for the interview process. So then they've got someone that believes in them, they've got a process that's is fair, and they've got a fighting chance of giving their best self to that interview process. And we have now seen, we've got a couple of matrons that have been appointed in the last year, I think as a direct result of some of the changes that we've made. And then finally, we do an awful lot to celebrate their appointment. Whoever it is, we plaster it all over Twitter, we put it all over our staff news. We really celebrate career progression for everybody. And that means that our international nurses can see others progress, and then they believe that they can do it too. Having the time to spend within the Stay and Thrive programme has been enormously beneficial for us in Somerset. We've got some real challenges around appointing and retaining people, and we want all of our colleagues whether they're from the UK or from overseas. We want every opportunity for them to thrive. So having some dedicated time and attention that we were able to tailor according to our local needs and what we knew about our local population has been really, really helpful. So learning from other people and other centres, and also giving something back and sharing what we've done, and that collaboration has allowed us to, I guess, make progress and pace that probably we weren't going to achieve without the Stay and Thrive programme.